Welcome, swimmers and swimmers. I'm today's host, Garrett McCaffrey. And our guest today just finished up his 18th season at San Jose State University. In 2022, he was the CSCAA's Ben Franklin Award winner. He was also a finalist for ASCA's Impact Coach of the Year in 2022. He's Sage Hopkins, and this is the Swim Swam Podcast. Sage, thanks for making time. We've been looking forward to this interview and trying to get this story out to our viewers for a little while. But I'd like to start just kind of talking as coaches. How was your season this past year that just kind of wrapped up at NICs last week?
It was an interesting season. We've got a great new assistant coach here, Steve Allnett, that we stole from San Diego State. And one of the things Steve and I did back in August was we sat down, took a look at the entire team, kind of areas for improvement, areas of strength, and we completely blew up what I had done for 17 years in terms of weekly cycle. And it was just fantastic. We had one of those seasons that, everybody has now and again with some bad luck, a lot of non-swimming related slip and fall injuries, car wrecks, etc. that, definitely took a toll on the end of the season, but we were really happy with the progress we made. If memory serves, I think Steve had figured out we had almost 4.5 scholarships not at our conference championships with some of these outside issues. And so that definitely hit our depth, but we're really happy with the progress we made, and we're very excited for long course season coming up.
Can you give us a little insight to that weekly cycle and what it looks like and why you're excited about it?
Yeah. So, essentially we've always done some power-based work Monday mornings. We split the team up and in a little bit non-traditional way. We had some people doing some longer power stuff that weren't necessarily distance oriented. We had people doing shorter power stuff that weren't necessarily sprinters, just trying to fill some holes. For instance, we've got a distance swimmer that we really needed to work on her front end speed. She can hold paces all day long, but we needed to kind of increase just her capacity to move quicker. Friday afternoons, we had my funnest group to work with. It was a very underwater oriented group, we made a lot of really great progress, underwater dolphin kicking, a lot of specialty work. Every day we had, usually 2-3 groups, sometimes as many as 5 groups going on. So a lot of detail, a lot of work on our part, but really a lot of fun, just really getting into the nuts and bolts of how to get people quicker, how to get them more confident. One of the things that we start with is just a get to know you meeting with each swimmer. We had one of the better swimmers I've ever worked with, Felicia Passon, transferred in from Arizona this year. And first thing I did with her is I sat down for probably 1.5 to 2 hours and just got her entire story. Really got to know her, what we needed to work on in the pool, out of the pool. And interesting thing afterwards, she goes, wow, that is the first time a coach has ever just sat and listened to me, which we really think is a big part of it. I mean, the swimmers need to know that we're really invested in them. They're going to trust us more, and they're going to be a lot more confident behind the blocks.
Awesome. Really good stuff. And I think we're going to kind of dive deeper into your, very loyal relationship with the swimmers and them as people, because this past season was pretty much the first season where you had some closure on an ongoing incident that, was an outside of the pool thing. So, I'm sorry to hear that there were more distractions this year, because it was your first chance to really kind of maybe have a little less drama as far as outside and around the pool, because you've been dealing with a big incident that started back in 2009 when one of your athletes made a comment to you about the athletic trainer, Scott Shaw. And now I was kind of hoping that you could just take us through the timeline from 2009 and just kind of take us pretty much all the way through 2022, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. It's a very long story. As I mentioned, I kind of made some notes of just some of the kind of key points. So essentially, like you said, December 2009, chatting with one of our swimmers, she mentions her shoulder hurts. And Scott Shaw at the time was our team trainer, said, well, have you been in to see Scott? And her response was, no, thanks. I don't feel like getting felt up. And jaw dropped. I asked, what are you talking about? And she had this just surprised look on her face. And she said, you don't know about this? And she went on to say, it was the entire female student athlete population was talking about it. To the extent found out a lot of the athletes across many sports weren't going into the training room and were instead going into the strength staff, and the strength coaches were doing rehab on them. After I spoke with that swimmer, I immediately reported to my supervisor at the time, and she directed me to call in every swimmer and diver individually and ask them. At the end of that, day and a half, it was a total of 17 people from my team that had reported sexual misconduct on the part of Scott. After each one of these meetings, I'd be back to my supervisors, we have another one, etc. At some point in this, I got pulled into the SWA at the time's office. And she just kind of flippantly threw out, oh, yeah, the gymnastics team complained about this last year, and we have a policy. There's always supposed to be a female trainer present whenever he's giving massages, which, wasn't really being adhered to, it sounds like.
Yeah, the SWA, just for coaches or viewers who might not be as in tune, because I didn't know until last year what an SWA is the Senior Women's Administrator. Was it just female athletes?
Correct, as far as I know. I have seen something where there's the name of a male athlete. I have no context. There's been a lot of stuff that's been sent to me from different agencies, and I have seen the name of a male athlete, but I don't know much detail on it.
Got it. Sorry to interrupt, but keep going there.
No problem. So next steps, we had all of this information. I had all of the swimmers and divers notes typed out, had them fact checked. Am I getting this correctly? Details in terms of what exactly happened, because there was a range, everything completely egregious, but definitely some of the student athletes much more so. And took that information, had a meeting with the athletic director, and we were told that the only way the school could do something about it is if one of the team members filed a police report. And that was done, and an investigation started. And immediately there was red flags popping up. The gentleman running that end of, I think what's now would be HR, back then it was the Equal Opportunity Office, he had gone out on medical leave. And ended up ultimately passing away. And so there were some low-level people running the investigation, and we're hearing stories of swimmer goes in to give an interview, and this is a very uncomfortable topic. They're nervous, anxious, and there's notes all over the table where they can see what every other athlete has said with their names on it. So I started relaying some of those concerns, and the athletic director told me that he would fire me if I got involved in the investigation in any way. He didn't want me talking about it. I was nervous about that, losing my job, the ADs threatening me. And so tried to stay back as much as I could, but then there was a lot of the swimmers, divers were coming to me with a lot of other concerns. And so again, I vocalized some of those concerns, just in terms of questions being asked. It seemed like they were somewhat cherry picking who they were interviewing, and that they had a whole list of who had made claims, who some of the swimmers had never been into the training room once, and they were being called in to be interviewed when they had never even stepped foot in the room. Some of the ones with the most egregious stories weren't being interviewed. One of whom was a minor at the time, was never interviewed.
I'm sure it's just speculation, but with some hindsight, seeing how this all kind of played out over a decade, why do you think the admin would avoid this kind of complaint? And why would you in any way be threatened in this situation?
You know, this isn't a San Jose State problem. This is a college problem, university problem across the country. Restaurants, we have the health department that inspects restaurants because it's not in a restaurant's best, business to report themselves if they've got unclean conditions. Universities and colleges are the same thing. You generally have a Title IX department that works under the strategic arm of the university. And the Title IX department, unfortunately, and this may be a little bit of a jaded opinion, their role is to protect the university. And you've got donor dollars, you've got all sorts of things. And this is, you can read the newspaper, USC, UCLA, Baylor, LSU, you can go on and on, Michigan State. And unfortunately, I think until Title IX departments are removed from universities and they have total independence, this is going to be a problem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's good perspective. And you kind of have a unique perspective from all of this. So you were saying that there was an underage victim who had filed a complaint through you and the police, but the administration was not interviewing her?
I don't think she was ever interviewed by the police either. And again, it seemed like some of the cherry picking. And unfortunately, a lot of the records have been lost. So there's, I think, a little bit of difference of opinion on that, depending on if you talk to her and I versus some other people. So we went through that process. At some point, late spring 2010, word came back. Scott was cleared, but he was never to work with any female student athletes. And one of the things we were told was, none of you have medical training. You can't understand the treatments you were receiving, which was, just an amazing thing. And I remember saying to my supervisor, the AD, find me one male athlete where he's sticking his hands inside of their underwear for a knee problem. If this is a valid treatment protocol, find me one male that he's treating in the same way. And, again, got my job threatened. You're going to be sued. He was cleared. He's protected by the union. He's untouchable on this. Nothing can ever happen. He's been investigated and cleared, closed case. You bring it up again, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. So at that point, my whole role in this was just to keep him away from my team and make sure. At that point, obviously, the whole team knew about it. But one of the things that very quickly got initiated was, once the team had kind of graduated out, so starting probably the first one of these discussions was maybe in 2013 or 14, the captains were always sat down and told the story by me about what had happened. We need to make sure the freshmen, keep an eye on them. We need to make sure this doesn't keep happening. It was actually in our team rules, you were not to see Scott Shaw. And it said the reason why is he's the men's basketball trainer. We're not supposed to see him. But every year we went over, do not see Scott Shaw.
So you left it to the captains to kind of make sure that you were not involved in it based on.
Well, no, it's more of just, no, I was still very involved. It was just another set of eyes.
So you talked to your team about Scott and making sure that they did not go and see him as well.
Yeah. And they didn't get much context other than he's not our team's trainer. Don't see him. And I made it a point when swimmers, divers needed to see the doctor, I was there. If I was unsure who they were going to be seeing in the training room, I'd pop in. To the point that after this whole story came out, there was multiple swimmers that kind of said, oh, that's why you were always hanging around. Because I was going to make sure. And to my knowledge, no swimmers recruited in after 2010, anything happened to them. To my knowledge.
Okay. There wasn't anything in 2012?
Well, that's, I caught something right as it started. And that was, I needed to find a freshman in 2012 to sign a piece of paperwork. This is maybe a week into the school year. And she said, oh, I'm in the training room. So I walked over to the training room, walked in, and it was her and Scott. She was in a sports bra. He was giving her a back massage. All the lights were turned down low, just the two of them in the training room. As soon as I walked in and he saw me, he just beelined out of the training room. And I asked the swimmer, why are you in here? Are you hurt? I mean, this is a week into the school year. She's a freshman. And she goes, oh, no, there's nothing wrong. Scott just reached out and said I looked tight and I needed to start seeing him for massages. And one of the things that's been identified, he was fairly sophisticated in that he would set up these meetings in training rooms where nobody else was there. Another story came out where he was taking people down to the football training room after hours. No one's down there, so no one would see what he was doing. I immediately went to my supervisor. I was just through the roof. And this is where first, big head knocking with administration, and walked in first. There was emails back and forth. Some of them that have been printed in the media, where Marie Tuitt initially tried to frame the situation as I didn't know who our team trainer was. And she actually went as far as copying the bulk of the senior staff of the athletic department, taking me to task for not understanding training protocols, and just shot right back to her. No, I'm well aware of our trainer. Point is, Scott is not supposed to be having physical contact with females.
And at that point, it was a new administration than the one in 2009.
Correct. Yeah. This is Jean Blameyer.
Marie Tuitt was the new senior women's administrator, and she's going to be a consistent character in this tragedy.
And Jean Blameyer was the athletic director. And so I got called into a meeting, and it was Marie, Jean, and myself. And I brought in the statements that all the swimmers had made back in 2009. And it was a fairly contentious meeting. Marie actually accused me of making the whole thing up. Said, Scott could sue you for bringing this up. And I handed the pieces of paper to them, and it was names redacted of what everybody had said. And Marie really blew it at that point, and gave me a string to tug on over the next 7 years. And she held up a manila folder in her hand that only had 2 pieces of paper in it. And she goes, Coach, none of these witness statements are in this file, and this is the file of Scott's investigation. I really think you just made all these up. And so I said, well, I've got date stamped emails that I could forward you from 2009. How about I send them to you? And she said, no, don't email them to me. But Gene, to his credit, said, no, I'd like to see that. Can you please email them? Which I did. Meeting didn't go well. Marie said, there's never been a policy. Scott can't treat females, etc. So I emailed all the stuff over to prove that these statements existed in 2009. And I immediately went back to my office and I called somebody from HR, because Marie gave me the name of who she'd gotten the file from. And it was a Title IX officer that works in HR, unfortunately still works here. And I had a conversation with her. I said, how could these, Marie said she had the investigation file and these notes weren't in there. There was only 2 pieces of paper. And the HR employee said, no, Marie couldn't legally have the investigation file. It can't legally leave my office. And I said, well, can you confirm that this information's in there? She said, I won't confirm or deny. And we went round and round and round. But the woman also said, we reviewed all this last year, which becomes important because it was other sports filing complaints also. To date, there's been victims, survivors identified from 6 separate women's teams. There was women's teams that were being assaulted before ours, during ours, and then I kept him away from us, but it looks like he just switched to other teams.
And in 2012, wasn't this the beginning of the Larry Nassar media, or am I getting those dates wrong?
There was stuff going on then, and I really became aware of what happened with Michigan State in 17, which kind of leads
2016 Olympics. I'm a little bit ahead.
And it had been going on at Michigan State, I think, for quite a while. So fast forward, there's some things that really came to a crux in 2015. We had a swimmer get injured. It was a cervical and a bad concussion from actually getting kicked in the head in a pace lane during a swim meet. And she needed to get some outside medical care. She knew the Scott story. And she was getting the runaround. The swim team got horrible treatment after 2012 from sports medicine, to the extent I've had a team doctor that's been a team doctor the whole time talk to me in private. He said, this makes so much sense now. Scott always badmouthed you to the doctors, the other trainers, etc., which makes sense with a lot of very barbed comments I would get from team doctors every now and again. So this swimmer that was just getting the runaround, being actually told, this is all in your head, this is anxiety, you don't have a problem. So she went to an off-campus doctor who said, well, yeah, you've got a cervical injury and you've got post-concussion syndrome. So this swimmer wrote a letter to the athletic director, Jean Blameyer, outlining all of the just inappropriate medical care she had received. And Marie went after her. And also tried to say, well, the only way we're going to pay for your treatment is if Scott Shaw can be in your off-campus exam rooms during these. And she came to me and said, no. And so I really stepped in at that point. And again, brought up, she knows about what went on. And one of the things that very happy I put in writing was I put in writing to Marie that myself and many, many athletes here feel like this was covered up. And Scott will not be attending her off campus. He has no business being in her exam room. There's no need. And that's not how our insurance works. If an athlete gets injured, we're responsible for the care. Scott Shaw doesn't have to be there for the insurance. So there was a lot of friction with that. My assistant coach at the time was getting very frustrated with it also. She was directly witnessing all this stuff. She had swum for us and was deeply aware of the whole Scott Shaw issue. So in 2016, there was 4 women that went to our school president at the time, President Martin. This was led by Wiggsy Sievertson, an absolute icon at San Jose State, ran our counseling center for decades, had the moniker of being the most powerful person on campus. So I knew that they had done something talking to the president, complaining about Marie. I never knew that they broached the Scott Shaw subject. And Taylor had told me, it was my assistant, softball assistant, Wiggsy, and then one of our associate ADs for compliance had gone in and separately talked to President Martin. This was her last week on the job. President Martin took very detailed notes and emailed them to President Papazian during President Papazian's first week on the job. My understanding is Papazian never replied or acknowledged receipt. So President Martin had somebody physically go to President Papazian and in person get a confirmation that Papazian had received this information. An investigation, a climate review started at that point. The whole athletic department thought that the review was because so many people had complained about Marie Tuitt, just her management style, verbally abusive, picking on people, bullying people, etc. The school kept it secret that it was an investigation on Scott Shaw. They never asked a question about Scott Shaw. They never acknowledged it. I was interviewed 3 separate times over the course of those months by the vice president of HR. She's still here on campus. Each one of the meetings, I broached the Scott Shaw subject. The report that was issued by HR said that no one said a word about Scott Shaw. And I know of multiple people in those meetings that brought up concerns that didn't go through. So again, the cover-up continued. And we now know that there's victims from multiple other women's teams, not mine, after 2016 that added up.
Why were they protecting him?
I think I can only speculate. And that's a question I've been asked more than any other. I think at this point it was people protecting their buddies. And once a cover-up starts, it just keeps going, gains velocity, gets larger and larger. So oddly, as a result of that, our Gene Blameyer got fired. Marie became AD, which she was very tight with all of these players. And it very likely was just, this was a way they had decided for her to become AD. So Marie becomes AD and actually took me out to lunch and gave me an ultimatum. I'd be loyal to her or she fires me. Which she said, hey, yeah, we can restart a relationship. So in 2017, I started becoming very aware of the Nassar issue. And late 17, I was reading something that years before the gymnasts had filed a complaint, another group at Michigan State had filed a complaint, and they were told, none of you have medical training, you couldn't understand the medical necessity. And that hit me like a brick, that Michigan State gave the same message to those female athletes that San Jose State gave to ours. And it was like, hey, you guys are too dumb to understand this stuff. And that really, really bothered me. And so January of 2018 was when I started making a huge push on this. I met with my supervisor at the time, who was SWA. And as a quick aside, back in 2013, I had mentioned there was a compliance director that had also complained to President Martin. Back in 2013, there was a meeting with a former athlete, our SWA, and the Associate AD for Compliance. And the former swimmer said to them, I was abused by Scott Shaw and no one ever interviewed me, and just went into this fury about it. And I heard this story separate from all three people. I heard it from the former swimmer who told me. I heard it from Lynn Mead, who was the Associate AD for Compliance, and I heard it from Liz Jarnigan, who was our SWA. This swimmer tells the story. Lynn and Liz start crying. Lynn looks at Liz and says, we need to do something about this. And Lynn ultimately, a few years later, went to President Martin over it. Well, it's January 2018, I start telling my supervisor, and I said, this has gone on. I want one total review of all the information. And if the school can tell me that this was properly handled, I will push back from the table and drop this matter. But I said, here's an example of how bad it is. And I started recounting the story about the swimmer talking to Lynn and Liz a handful of years before. And the SWA interrupts me and says with a big tone, yeah, and Lynn went to the president to try to get people in trouble and nothing happened. You need to drop this right now. And I was shocked because the SWA didn't work at San Jose State back then. We now know it was all because of that 2016 investigation where Lynn had gone to President Martin. And so the whole department was aware of this issue. So I said, no, I'm insisting that I've got a lot of documentation I've put together, and I want to have a meeting with Kathy Wong Lau, who's our Chief Diversity Officer and oversees Title IX, and Wendy Liss, who's our Title IX Director for campus.
Were you scared? I mean, at this point, Marie has told you you can't cross the line, and now you know that your direct supervisor, the new SWA, is telling you to drop it. Were you worried that, this would be the thing that Marie used to fire you somehow?
I don't know the worried, but deeply aware of just possible consequences. And so I walked into a meeting in Tower Hall, which is where our president and her cabinet are located. And it was in Kathy Wong Lau's office. And I started telling the story. And I was very careful not to use Marie's name because she's buddies with all these people. I'm just trying to get them to understand what had gone on before they circle around their buddy Marie. And in the process of trying to set this meeting up with Wendy Liss, our campus Title IX director, she assured me in writing this matter had been properly handled, and I insisted on the meeting. So I knew it was going to be very difficult when I think it was Kathy asked, well, who is this supervisor that's been retaliating against the program and bullying you over this? And I said, Marie Tuitt. And Kathy and Wendy looked at each other, rolled their eyes, and I was just like, okay, great. They don't believe me. So I said, well, I've got a lot of documentation. I'd like to put it together and send to you to review. And Kathy said something that really set off an alarm bell. And she said, okay, we'd like to see everything, but don't email any of it to us because we're worried about FOIA requests. And one, colleges don't honor FOIA requests that have anything to do with any type of protected information.
What is a FOIA request?
It's since we're a state entity, it's Freedom of Information Act. So anything in my email inbox is public info, and you can just send an email in. I want all of Sage Hopkins' emails to Garrett McCaffrey, and the school has to give them over. They're going to look them over and see that there's no private information with FERPA or HIPAA violations, things like that. But the school's never going to give a FOIA request with anything that's Title IX related in terms of survivors' names, et cetera. So at that point, I was very concerned that they didn't want a paper trail. So it took about a week, and I assembled a roughly 300-page packet that the media is called, the 300-page packet or 300-page dossier. And I hand walked it into Wendy Liss's office and handed it to her. And then, thank God, I sent a follow-up email cataloging everything I'd given her, because the 300 pages was probably maybe 50, 60 separate documents. And so I sent her an email. This is everything I just gave you. She acknowledged receipt of it in a reply email. Well, at some point, a few weeks afterwards, Wendy Liss left San Jose State. And the Title IX HR person that I had knocked heads with back in 2012 became interim director. And at that point, I was pretty freaked out because my reporting had a lot of stuff about this HR person not properly responding. And now I knew she had the packet. Interestingly, that same HR, I've had a lot of people help behind the scenes, and I have a deposition that HR person gave on a whole different thing months prior, where she elaborated on San Jose State had recently installed this Title IX database so that information could never slip through the cracks, information couldn't get lost, it would completely catalog everything. So I was told when I gave everything over, don't talk to anybody about this. Don't say a word. It's confidential. This could take 6 to 9 months before you even hear anything back. So I was waiting, and just nothing. In the summer of 2019, we had a new Title IX director come in, Tracy Sagawa. And I got to know her, felt that I could trust her. So I went in and had a meeting with the president of the union and the faculty rights chair. And I said, I need somebody to accompany me in this meeting to witness me reporting this. And our faculty rights chair at the time came into a meeting with myself and Tracy Sagawa. I handed her a copy of the 300-page packet and outlined the story. And Tracy just went through the roof. She said, there is no record of this in university data. There was a formal handoff of all paperwork. It's not there. And there's no messaging of it. And then Tracy said, we just became the next Michigan State. And so Tracy set up a lot of protocols. We couldn't communicate on university email, university phones through the university server. When we met off campus. So a couple of weeks later, we met off campus at a private room in a library, probably 30-minute drive from here. And she had a lot of clarifying questions she had after reviewing all the information. And said, you have reported this to any possible person on this campus. You could have reported at this point. We have to go outside. It really looks like the entire university leadership is implicated in a cover-up. So she helped me prepare a lot of just timelines, documents, clean it all up to make it a little bit more easily digestible. And in November of 19, my assistant at the time, Whitney Jorgensen, and I reported it any possible place we could report it to. The NCAA is one of the entities that kind of helped carry this over the finish line, but I don't think that was their intent. I had a conversation with the NCAA, I think it was November 7th of 2019, and was told I somehow had gotten through to a compliance person that I think dealt with basketball. It was a very high up person. And he actually said the words, well, this may not really be an NCAA thing. The NCAA doesn't have any rules against sexual misconduct, which, are you kidding me? I said, well, what about the ethics clause? And his response was, oh, that's really hard to prove. And what we now know is somebody from that office picked up the phone and secretly gave San Jose State a heads up of what I was doing. And so Whitney and I, in our naivety, we thought, report everything. The next day there was going to be, our joke was a whole line of black SUVs pulling up the curb with these people to sort this situation out. And it was just crickets. And heard nothing back from the NCAA. I'd reported it to all these other agencies, hadn't heard anything. And so early December, I asked our former Associate AD for Compliance, David Rasmussen, to come meet with us. I gave him a copy of the packet, told him the story, and it's like, do you have any suggestions on how I can get the NCAA's ear on this? And he was just blown away. And interestingly, it was about a week later, the NCAA formally responded. They had done the tip off to their buddy on what I was doing. And then the NCAA sent an email to our faculty athletic rep, head of compliance, Marie, and I think maybe the president's office, and essentially just emailed all the stuff I had sent them to Marie. It's like you go tell on a bully to your teacher, and the teacher just tells the bully, hey, he told on you.
At any point, did you just want to give up? Like, the system is so corrupt from, everything that you had come through, multiple administrative, tenures and everything. You did everything. You were doing everything you could to fight the good fight. At any point, did you want to, I'm surprised too. It seems like you had to keep everything in really tight line to, because any excuse you gave them, they would have probably fired you to get rid of this. But at any point, did you just want to quit? Because it's got to be just depleting to try to fight the good fight and just realize the layers of corruption that were in place. No,
I can honestly say that quitting never crossed my mind. I think by nature, I'm pretty stubborn. And I was not going to let this go. And one of the things in September of 2019, so this is right before I had reported everything, we had our first alumni meet in many years. We have a new pool. We didn't have a pool for a multi-year period, so no alumni meet. And one of the original survivors, we're out to lunch afterwards, and she looks at me and says, is that man still here? And I said, well, yeah, actually, he's been promoted to the director of sports medicine, and saw the tears in her eyes. And yeah, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. And she just shook her head and said, this is disgusting. And it brought me back to a team meeting we had in 2010 when I had to tell the team Scott got cleared. And that was one of the worst days of my life. Just the look on these women's faces, they were just shattered. Their faith in their university was shattered. Their faith in just processes being followed to protect them was shattered. And so, no, I wasn't going to quit. I had made a commitment to just carry this to the finish line, and make sure that he was never going to harm another athlete. And then also that these people that protected him were going to be held to justice. And some have, some haven't. And so that's something that's still pretty bothersome.
I know that you wouldn't want this for any of your athletes, but sometimes in tragic situations, there's like a galvanizing effect on a team or a group. Do you think in some ways that, your women know more than many other programs how much their coach has their back and cares from them because of this?
That original cohort, definitely. I mean, there wasn't a lot of knowledge about it until 2020. And I think that the current team has a realization. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Do you think that's one of the reasons they couldn't fire you? Because that's my other question. Why do you think you were
they
able
tried
to
hard.
survive it?
They really tried hard, which I'll get. We're kind of coming up on that because this is when it gets crazy. So December, so the NCAA kicks everything to campus. I think late December, about a week later, I get a text message from Tracy Sagawa, our Title IX director, said, hey, a formal investigation is going to happen. There's going to be an emergency meeting in the athletic department tomorrow to inform the whole department. Scott is to have no physical contact with athletes, and he's under investigation. She texted me the next day, and the text read, upstairs has decided to forego the meeting, and HR and the SWA that tried to shut down my reporting were going to monitor Scott's restrictions that he was to have no contact with female athletes. They didn't monitor the restrictions. They went after me instead. And we now know Scott was still abusing women. Women from other teams have come forward that he abused in that time period. And the only thing that stopped him was school getting shut down because of COVID. And that was what stopped him. And so things at this point were entirely just hostile towards me. And I also now really know there's been a cover-up. Tracy has confirmed all of the original records were destroyed. There was only 2 pages. So that 2 pages Marie held up in 2012, that was the investigation file. And there was only 2 pieces of paper in it. And Marie read me what was in it back in 2012. And now it's come out and it was the exact same thing. So the SWA was supposed to go to conference championships. And she was back and forth. Hey, it was at Minnesota. There's a hotel right there. You guys are a few miles away. And I was trying to encourage her to stay. I didn't want to be around her. She helped cover up the abuse, or was part of it. Whether she helped or was just ignorant and that she couldn't do her job, I don't know. But I did not want her. She didn't deserve to be on our bus. And so finally she said, hey, can you send me all your travel arrangements? I sent it all to her. She replied, I think I'm going to stay at your hotel and ride on the bus with you guys back and forth to the meet. And so I sent her an email saying, I wasn't comfortable having her on the bus. And the exact quote was, the right thing could have been done and should have been done by various administrators at multiple times over the past decade. I have been deeply troubled and sickened by this for years, and I'm especially so now that I have a deeper understanding of what did happen, what didn't happen, and what should have happened. Again, it gives me no pleasure to write this message to you. And the you-know-what hit the fan at that point. A lot of it was behind the scenes that I wasn't going to find out for a couple of weeks, in some cases a few months. About a week later, I got a call from one of our other coaches who told me that the same SWA was insinuating I was having an affair with my assistant. And I just went through the roof. Filed a complaint about that. And then I emailed a report to the Mountain West office reporting all of the Scott Shaw stuff, the information I now had about the cover-up, and said, I want this SWA removed from our travel party, because I had submitted our travel party roster. She's not traveling with us. She can go on her own, but she's not part of our party. The Mountain West office just forwarded my email right back to Marie to it. Didn't do anything to investigate, even though they have a supervisory capacity. So then we walk in the next Monday, and our offices have been broken into. The filing cabinets have been rifled. Everything's in a different spot. So I go to Tracy Sagawa in Title IX, tell her, hey, somebody just went through all of our stuff. Offices have been broken into. She said, okay, remove everything Scott Shaw related from the office, keep it someplace safe. So my attorney had a copy. I had a copy. There was a copy locked away in a safe. She said, report to campus police, which we did. All of the security cameras around our offices had been set to delete footage, depending on the camera, every 3 to 10 hours. So there was no footage available to see who had gone into our offices. And then we had the next day, a high-level campus person who's still here, I'm not going to say her name, came out to the pool and confronted Whitney and I on why we had reported Scott Shaw, and actually said the words, this happened so long ago. These women aren't even students here. There's nothing we can do for them. It's not even a Title IX matter at this point. You just need to let it go. Then said, this just really seems like it's just an uncomfortable massage, and they're just not uncomfortable having a man massage her. And took us to task, and then said, we really think this whole thing is because you don't get along with Marie and the SWA. And then oddly went into this rant that she was a feminist and was furious we weren't hiring a female volleyball coach as she left. Which it was just amazing. And that was one of the things. Whitney and I were just defeated. This is somebody that's supposed to have kind of a check and balance over athletics, and she's defending what's going on. And then this there was an iteration of campus responses to it. The first response was that I had a vendetta against Scott Shaw and just was trying to get him fired and had made the whole thing up. Then it turned into the official stance was the team had performed poorly, and this was a ploy for me to not get fired. And then it turned into I was a misogynist and wouldn't work for females. And so I had convinced all of these former athletes at this point from 6 different sports to go along with my story because I'm a misogynist. And then it turned into, once the DOJ and FBI got involved, that I had somehow tricked the DOJ and FBI. And because of some kind of misogynism, it doesn't connect at all. But that was kind of the point. Then probably a couple days after that, I got called in to a meeting in HR with the same vice president that's still here that had been part of falsifying the report in 2016. I got what's called a no contact order, essentially a restraining order. And for, I think it was a year and a half, I was not allowed to step foot in the athletic department. And I could have no contact, email, text message, anything with this SWA. Who was they were all in on I was crazy. And so we're sitting in this meeting. It's the vice president in terms of HR, Steve O'Brien, who was our deputy director of athletics at the time. And they're going through all this stuff. And Joanne Wright, the vice president, said that I had been deemed mentally unstable and a safety risk. And that's why I wasn't allowed in the athletic department. And she had invited me, any questions you have, we need to make sure you understand this. And I said, well, help me understand how it's okay for me to travel all over the country with 20 to 30 women on university business. So there's no safety concerns there. And she kind of dodged the question. And I said, well, what proof do you have to make the claims that I'm mentally unstable and a safety risk? And she said, well, that January 22nd email to Eileen Daly, you refused to provide travel details. And she had the email. I said, well, look, one email before in the string, that's all of our travel details. And at that point, she said, look, this isn't a cross-examination. You don't get to keep asking questions. And the union rep that was with me said, well, you started the meeting saying to ask questions. And so then at that point, and I was super calm through the whole thing. Lucky enough that got very involved in breath work about 10 years ago. So I was able to just stay totally composed. And I looked at Joanne Wright and I said, aren't you concerned this could be retaliatory or seen as retaliation for my reporting? She said, no, it's absolutely not retaliatory. And I looked at Steve O'Brien and I said, are you concerned that this could be perceived as retaliatory? And Steve actually said, well, yeah, Sage, and I've actually raised those concerns, and I'm concerned you're getting retaliated against. And at that point, Joanne Wright slammed her computer shut and said, this meeting is over. And we walked out the door. And Steve actually got fired. Steve had been directed to reprimand me. And he said, I need to know why I'm reprimanding Sage. He's been here forever. He's always got stellar job reviews each year. I need to understand why I'm reprimanding somebody. I'm concerned about this situation. And he got fired for refusing to reprimand me. And they wouldn't tell him why. The Marie Tuit just said, you're going to reprimand him. You don't need to know why. And I think that the title was insubordination.
Is the NCAA investigation still going on at this point? Or
the NCAA never investigated.
Okay.
The NCAA asked San Jose State to investigate.
What about the Department of Justice? Is that already
they
started?
hadn't? They're coming right around the corner.
Got it.
So we're leaving for conference championships. I remember it like yesterday. I thought somebody was going to pull me off the bus and say, you're not going on the trip. Marie sent one of her lackeys, one of our associate ADs, to the meet, and the guy stood next to me the whole time, just listening on everything. He was clearly there trying to get some kind of dirt on me, to the extent that we had a couple of the parents ask me midway through the meet, hey, who's this guy that always just seems to be spying on us? And I just kind of dodged the question. Oh, yeah, just an administrator here to support us. So, pretty quickly after that, shelter in place hit, COVID, and that may have saved me from getting canned right there. Because now the investigations are winding up. Around this time, President Martin, it was the outgoing President Martin that had received all those reports in 2016. She started having health problems, and this gets almost like something out of a movie. She had all that documentation from her 2016 meetings. She became concerned about her health. She gave it to somebody else for safekeeping and said, if something ever happens to me and this whole Scott Shaw thing blows up again, I need you to report this to somebody. Right after that, she fell down the stairs and got a brain injury that incapacitated her. She can't communicate, can't receive communication. But she had given this stuff to safekeeping. April of that year, USA Today puts out this explosive article. The person she had given the stuff to sees it, and I'm not quite sure who that person is, where they reported it, but it ended up on the DOJ's radar. Thank God President Martin did that. So April or May, I had a job review and just got absolutely torn apart.
May of 21 or 20?
This is May of 20. Got just ripped apart. And Marie actually said the reason I was getting ripped apart in my job review was because I had reported Scott Shaw, and it embarrassed her and it embarrassed the university. She accused me of being a misogynist because I had reported a female athletic director. Just bizarre stuff. She's an absolute narcissist. And I think she truly believes she didn't do a thing wrong. So USA Today article comes out. I get ripped apart in the interview, and then my contract expires end of May. And so, I got a week left on my contract, send an email, hey, what's going on here? And I get kind of Marie emails back, I'll get back to you on it. Contract expires. I send an email to her and copy the school president. What's going on with my contract? Well, I get the CSU system contacts me, California State University system contacts me. I said, okay, you're going to get a new contract if you withdraw. At this point, there was a whistleblower complaint that had spun up. You remove your whistleblower complaint, you remove your retaliation complaint against Marie, you'll get a new contract in a race. But Scott's going to get off scot-free, no pun intended, and Marie's going to still be here. I just have a new 2-year contract in a raise. And I emailed back, I'm not interested in a raise. I'm not interested in a new contract. I'm not dropping this. So June 29th, contract hasn't expired for a month now. I file a complaint, retaliation for not returning my contract. And then that was June 29th. on June 29th, the DOJ also let San Jose State know, hey, you're under investigation. Whether it was one of those things, both of those things, I think it was a day or two later, I got a new contract with the raise I had declined. Interestingly, the school, when all of this was blowing up, said, oh no, we love Sage. We even gave him a raise that I had declined. So the 2021 year was absolutely horrendous, horrible. At this point, the DOJ investigation was public. I was getting rude comments from other coaches, rude comments from donors, comments, all of these, we've got these Zoom meetings, other meetings where, these accusations, all this stuff's made up. This is just disgruntled employees, blah, blah, blah. Had one coach who's not here anymore actually call me and say, doesn't matter whether Marie's right or wrong. If you can't be loyal to her, you need to quit. And I wasn't engaging in any of these things because I felt a lot of them were setups where I lose my temper and then they can use something against me. So a trend started that year where anytime there was a media article about Scott Shaw, Marie would receive an anonymous report the team had violated COVID protocols. And every time we get shut down, sometimes we'd only be shut down for a day. Sometimes we'd have to do a 5-day quarantine. And we never had a single swimmer, diver test positive for COVID that entire 2021 year, which is amazing. And we were getting tested sometimes 5 days a week. So that went on all through the year. And then at some point I started getting anonymous emails that escalated into death threats. And it was always whenever there was a media article, boom. And I started filing official complaints. The team's getting retaliated against. This is every time there's an article, the AD gets an anonymous tip. Some of them were, I don't know if she made some up. Some of them I think were through the real response system. One of the worst ones was we had to do a 10-day quarantine when we were reassembled after the winter break. We came out of the 10-day quarantine. The team was maybe 10 minutes into our first practice. Our trainer walks up, hey, there's been an anonymous tip. Everyone has to go back into a quarantine. And just the mental toll this took on the team. Every time this would happen, or just about every time it would happen, we'd have somebody opt out and just say, this is ridiculous. I can go back home and swim with my club. Here, we swim a day, we're in quarantine for 5 days. Swim a day in quarantine for 10 days. This is ridiculous. And I totally agreed. So we get this shut down this time, and I get told that the pictures have been sent in of swimmers at a frat party on ready response, real response, whatever that anonymous tip thing is. And so I'm walking back out to the car, feeling just absolutely dejected. And I passed by a campus police officer that I know. He's like, that was a short practice. And I was like, yeah, apparently the school received notice there were swimmers at a frat party last night. We just got put in quarantine. And the cop goes, well, first of all of the frat houses are vacant right now. And second of all, I was on last night. There was no parties. We've been nonstop patrolling that area. So I get a text message from one of the assistant athletic directors, hey, your supervisor has pictures of the swimmers that violated protocol. And so then we go into this just all day, all night thing where I'm being told, all right, what are you going to do to punish these swimmers? I said, okay, well, who was it? We're not going to tell you. We need you to question every one of the teams. So we went through, questioned everybody. Were you at this? Were you at this? No. No one was at any parties. Go back. No one's saying they're at any parties. And the supervisor said, okay, well, what are you going to do to discipline them? They will discipline who? I have no information. Like, well, we know swimmers were at a party. We have the pictures. And I said, okay, well, who's in the pictures? And we're not going to tell you. They were submitted confidential. And so we kind of went through this whole thing. I said, look, I have no information. I'm going to defer any punishment to the athletic administration. And then I get response. This is all via text message. It's in writing. Are you refusing to do your job? And I said, no, I'm not refusing to do my job, but I can't give somebody any type of a consequence when I don't know who to give or what they even did. And it just was back and forth. And finally, my wife has just said, stop responding, which just kind of did. Interestingly, around this time, the original thing was told us and some athletes from another team were together at the thing. So I finally got a hold of the other coach and I said, do you have any information on this? He's like, what are you talking about? I'm at practice right now. We didn't get shut down. So I went back to the the assistant AD that was in charge of all this stuff. I'm like, why? And I was told we still are quarantined tomorrow. I'm like, why are we still in quarantine? And why is this other team not in quarantine? And she's like, you're fine to practice tomorrow. So again, it was just, they were just messing with me and messing with the team. And that went all through. I kept complaining this is retaliation. School had no interest until some of the administrators started receiving the emails also. And then they were bothered. So the police came in, it escalated. Actually, there was death threats made to the whole team. The whole team had to meet with campus police. And it was always right in the vicinity of these articles. You know, Swim Slam came into the picture a little bit also. We finished conference that year. Our longest time in the pool, we swam for, I think, about 2.5 weeks before the conference championships. That was our big training block going into the meet. And before that, we were really out of the water for probably 2 months. And the administration had told me, once your season's over, no more practicing. We're not going to pay for testing. We want you guys out of the facility, no practice. Somebody on the team reached out to Swim Swam, and Swim Swam put out an article, San Jose State swimming put on pause. And the administration went after me. And they're like, are you refusing to coach your team in the off season? And so I forwarded them the email saying, you guys can't practice. And I said, well, help me understand this. You tell me in writing we can't practice. Now you're telling me I'm refusing to do my job by not coaching. And that went back and forth, where they wouldn't even acknowledge that they had told me we couldn't practice, where they were just trying to keep painting me as refusing to do my job. So kind of made it through that. And then when things in some ways got a little bit better, April 15th of 20, an emergency Zoom meeting was called by our school president, President Papazian and Lisa Malora. One of the things that cooked Papazian's goose, so to speak, was she had told the media months prior that she had never heard the word Scott Shaw until the USA Today, or until the NCAA had emailed her all the stuff. Because she didn't think anybody knew about the President Martin emails. President Martin at this point can't speak to anybody, can't communicate in any way. She thought she was off scot-free and said, hey, I've never heard of this Scott Shaw issue until President Martin's documents came to light. But they called a meeting that Marie clearly didn't know what was going on. And I've got a Zoom recording of the meeting that I watch from time to time. And Marie's body language just, I mean, she's furious that this meeting's going on, shaking her head. She clearly didn't know what was happening. And it was pretty quickly after that she was removed as AD, became, I think, special assistant to the president or something.
And this is April of 21?
April of 21. Yeah, April of 21 was when that meeting was. So, you know, you had kind of asked before earlier, just, you know, how things are now. And there's a lot of support. New athletic administration is awesome. You know, in one of Jeff Konya's first meetings with the department, he broached the Scott Shaw subject. He said, this is something that needs to be talked about. This can't be something that's kept under the rug, because this can never happen again. And that spoke volumes in terms of his commitment to protecting student athletes and his commitment to morals and ethics, something that I don't think I had experienced in my previous years at San Jose State. So Jeff, Scott McDonald, they are awesome. Having administrators with their level of competence is amazing. But Wendy Liss is still here. Actually, remember I handed all the stuff to Wendy Liss. She left the university. We rehired her in the midst of all of this. There's two possibilities. All of this stuff was destroyed after Wendy left the university, and she did everything right. Good for her. But then she came back to work for the same people that she knew destroyed the stuff. That's not a good answer. Other is she knew it got all destroyed. Worse answer. And we rehired her. And the school's response, there's a student advocacy group that had a meeting about it and informed me and said, the school said, well, we can't find anybody else to take that job for $120,000 a year or whatever it pays. So we hired Wendy. But we understand the optics aren't good, so we're not going to make a campus announcement about it, which they ended up doing at some point a few months ago.
So this hire was after Marie was let go? Or?
Well, she actually came in and out a couple of times. I kind of think we keep rehiring her because of all these lawsuits and trials going on, and they kind of want to control her depositions. That's speculation on my part. But what's
going on with the lawsuits and everything at the point when she's kind of being rehired and in 21? Like, when did the lawsuits start to get filed?
So there was a group of student athletes from multiple sports. If memory serves, swimming and diving, women's water polo, volleyball, and possibly soccer were involved in that lawsuit. I think maybe gymnasts too.
And it was against the entire university?
Correct, and Scott Shaw. And so there was a group that took the DOJ settlement where they got, I think, $125,000 each. But then there was a group that proceeded with the lawsuit, and that was a $5 million settlement. And then there's been a few others that have popped up that have gotten a $225,000 settlement. And then John Manley, who's the attorney that has represented all the U.S. Olympic gymnasts, the Michigan State gymnasts, represented USC victims from, I think it was a gynecologist there. He has a class action suit against the university from other athletes. And then the other thing out there is Scott's trial. He's getting federally prosecuted. And the trial starts in earnest, I think, in June. There's hearings popping up every now and again. I've gone to some of them. Some are being Zoom. I've gone to one in-person one. So that's going on also. And speaking, there's some people that I think deserve a lot of thanks and credit in this. Tracy Sagawa, first and foremost. The university drove her out when they found out she helped me report. They pushed her right out the door. Steve O'Brien refused to reprimand me. They fired him over it. I want to say he won something like a $750,000 settlement. David Rasmussen, our former senior associate AD for compliance, when Marie found out that I had gone to him, he knew about my reporting, and didn't tell her, he got shoved out the door. Rachel Denhelander, if you've seen Athlete A, you know who she is, the first gymnast to publicly come out against Larry Nassar. She's now a civil rights attorney. She found me very quickly after the USA Today article and offered to just work with these victims. And every single one of them has just raved about how much Rachel helped them process, heal, move forward. So Rachel has a special place for everything she's done to help. Wigsy Severson, she's a hero at San Jose State. Dear friend of mine, to find out what she did behind the scenes. Taylor Corrado, my old assistant, what she had done behind the scenes and not telling me to kind of give me a level of protection, I think is huge. There's a segment of campus that's very appreciative of me. There's also, not gonna lie, I don't go to sporting events because of comments I've gotten from, primarily boosters. I've had some boosters email me gifts, email me thank yous, email me free tickets to sporting events in the area. I've had some boosters say some pretty horrible things. And so I just don't go to athletic events anymore because I don't need to be sitting with my daughter in a football stadium and having boosters yell at me. And so there is a segment that I hope this stuff is going to die down and heal, because unfortunately, there's a lot of people that firmly believe Marie's story, that she's the victim and that I made all this up. It's just fascinating that intelligent people could think a swim coach assembled dozens of athletes from 6 separate teams to go along with my story, and I tricked the FBI and I tricked the DOJ because I'm some sort of a bad actor.
Do you think that's what Southern Utah Tech believes? Because last month it was announced that Marie was hired as the AD at Southern Utah Tech, which is another Mountain West school, right?
No, I think it's Southern Utah University.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. I'll be honest with you, it's a school I never heard of until the media started contacting me for quotes.
But I heard that they also said that they did their due diligence. I mean, do you think it must have been talking to those people who still believe Marie's story and believe that you are just making all of this up?
That's the only thing I can think of. Unfortunately, I mentioned we've got a vice president of HR here who may have given a good recommendation. I don't know. She's got friends here on campus. She's got people that are very furious with me inside the athletic department, outside the athletic department, because she's gone. And people's perception of their reality. And I don't understand how, there's been dozens and dozens of newspaper articles. Many of these women have publicly come forward with their names, pictures, telling their stories. I don't understand how somebody can read that and account after account after account from dozens of women. It's all made up. And when a very reliable source told me there was a booster event while Marie was still here, where one of the boosters walked up to her publicly and said, what's going on with all this Scott Shaw stuff? And Marie's response was, you know how young girls make things up. It's from a reliable source. I wasn't there, but everything I've seen from her, that's very common type of behavior. If you're not somebody that's going to help advance her career, she's got no interest in you.
Do you worry that this is going to define your career?
Yeah, I don't want it to. One of the things, a common thing that I'm told is, "Oh, you're a hero," and my response every time is, "I am not a hero. I just did my job. I protected my team." The reality is, I will probably never get hired by another university, no matter how well I'm doing as a coach, because there's going to be reluctance to hire somebody that could be perceived as a loose cannon. And they're going to ignore the fact that over a multi-year period, I exhausted every internal reporting mechanism and patiently waited for that mechanism to work out. Because every time you're told, don't talk to anybody about this, it could take 6 to 9 months before you know anything. And so I think probably, yeah, it will. You Google my name and that's what's going to pop up.
Well, I'd like to think that even if it is, that's a pretty great thing that you would have that kind of support for your athletes to the point where you would risk your job, risk your sanity, continue fighting that fight despite all of the obstacles and corruption that you encountered. So when I ask that question, I don't think that it's necessarily a worry. I actually think it's, something you should be proud of.
Yeah, from
like you said, perception is reality, and it just takes one smart. And hopefully you're at San Jose State and happy for a very long time. But
yeah,
it takes just one to kind of see the fight that you fought and how courageous it was to kind of have your back and make it into a good thing. Kind of bringing it all back around to coaching. How has it made you a better coach?
That's a good question. I'd mentioned kind of all of the breath work that we've incorporated into the program. that, we're at a time where there's a mental health crisis that's going on with our youth. And so me learning how to implement these things, I can share that with the team. And, we've had a couple of them that came back to me and said, what, that saved my life. Learning how to do those things and dealing with, and these are people that are in profound levels of stress. And the fact that I can this has been a horrible, a lot of ways, 12 years, but from me reporting in 2019, especially through probably 21, horrendous, absolutely horrendous. I didn't sleep at night. I did not do a good job taking care of myself for a long time. When the shelter in place happened, and jiu-jitsu has always been a huge outlet for me. Once the jiu-jitsu gym was shut down, it was very, very trying. And I had to really lean on a lot of the tools that Brian McKenzie, Andrew Huberman have kind of given to me to kind of get me through it. And then just trying to help the team with that type of stuff. And then, in terms of a coach, I think it's been really important to just kind of reevaluate why I do what I do, and why I'm here. And, the bottom line is to just help these people become a better version of themselves, become a better athlete, a better student, and get prepared for, a really successful life once they graduate from San Jose State.
Yeah. Sage, it feels like all the women, at San Jose State are lucky to have you, because there's a very good chance that if you weren't there fighting this fight, that it could still be going on right now. And just really appreciate you sharing the story with us. And wishing you the best of luck going forward. Hopefully this is something that you can really put, behind you, and hopefully next season, not any outside the pool distractions. I know that's wishful thinking. Minimal outside the pool distractions, because
we're ready to go.
Have a good season.
Yeah, we've got a tremendous team in the fall. We've got some great signees coming in. We'll be back to healthy in the fall, and we're going to be ready to go.
Thanks so much. Best of luck. Hopefully we'll talk next time more about swimming.
All right. Thanks a lot, Garrett. You take care.
You too, Sage.
You've been listening to the Swim Swam podcast. Stay tuned for new episodes every week. You can take Swim Swam podcast on the go by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Look for links in the description below, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos as well.